I was carrying a box labeled, books but mostly cables, up 3 flights of stairs when I saw it for the first time, the list of Wi-Fi networks blooming from every apartment like gossip. Cute names, edgy names, names that made you feel judged by someone's minimalism. There was Netgear_87D1 and FBI_surveillance_van_2 and a humble Susan. It was the first day I moved in with Lena, and I remember thinking, in that dopey way people think when they're happy, that this was the last time I would have to haul my life upstairs because from here on out, we were one life, with one router and one bill and one pair of scissors that always disappeared when you needed them. We'd argued, playfully, about whose router to keep, mine, a boring rectangle I called the brick, or hers, which was white and slim and sat on the shelf like it listened to podcasts about Scandinavian design. We kept hers. She'd lived in the apartment 3 years, knew which outlets had grudges and where the floor tilted slightly so pens rolled like they were auditioning for an escape room. She handed me a label maker and we labeled everything because we are, in our hearts, the kind of people who believe tidy names tame chaos. On the shelf above the TV, a little shrine, the router, the label reading, router, the plant named Gary who was already judging me. What should we name the network? I asked, because in my mind this mattered. It was like naming a pet we'd both feed. Nothing punny, she said. No land solo. I put a hand to my heart. You wound me. She thought for a second. Let's call it apartment plant, she said, pointing at Gary. That feels cozy. I typed it in and made the password, carb sandkisses, and she laughed and kissed me, which I confess was my main goal. The first weirdness happened 2 weeks later during a thunderstorm that sounded like furniture falling upstairs. Our lights flickered and the internet died like it had gone to lie down. I opened the Wi-Fi list to reconnect and saw a network I hadn't seen before, come_home_li. It sat there in black letters, bold, shameless, like a note pinned to a public notice board. I pointed at it. Who's Ollie? I asked, half joking, expecting, weird neighbor. Also, change your password, nerd. Lena stared without blinking in a way that felt like she had to remember how blinking works in order to do it. No idea, she said. Someone's breakup is leaking. She tossed me the flashlight and said, can you check the power strip? Gary has autonomy and may have unplugged us. I knelt by the cords, found the loose plug, got us connected again, and put the weird network away in the junk drawer in my head where you store trivia. It felt like a note for someone else. Other networks came and went. 2 doors down got a puppy and renamed theirs Puppy Camera, which, okay, please don't hack yourself. Someone upstairs went through a phase where they changed their name every day to something confrontational, pay_your_portion_Brent, stop_eating_my_yogurt, and my personal favorite, not_your_therapist_Kayla. The building had personality. The night I couldn't sleep because the air was the wrong temperature and my brain was playing an old highlight reel of humiliation, I got up quietly, careful not to wake Lena. I padded to the kitchen, poured water, and watched the rain slant. My phone pinged with a software update and when it reconnected, there it was again, come_home_li. At 2 in the morning it felt less like gossip and more like a light in a window across an alley. I scrolled the network list like I was reading strangers' poems. There was Netgear_87D1 and Susan and NSA truck, again, sir, please stop, but the one that looked at me was come_home_li. A minute later, it blinked out and a new one took its place, sorry_about_the_soup. I actually laughed alone in our kitchen at 2:09 a.m. and whispered to no one, he really messed up. I went back to bed and told myself that the city writes confessions in the air sometimes and you don't have to pick them up. You'd think I would have asked Lena about it in the morning. I did not. Not because I am particularly chill, but because at breakfast we were doing that gentle dance you do when you're still practicing living together, me trying to put my coffee mug where I kept putting it, her moving it to the coaster because we are now people with coasters, me apologizing to Gary for breathing near him. The day was ordinary and then full and then over. A month in, during one of those golden Saturdays that make you think you solved adulthood, we hosted her friends for dinner. There was a moment in the kitchen where I stood at the stove stirring risotto exactly like the internet told me to, while Lena's best friend Nora asked me questions like I was applying for a job called Not Hurting Her. Where are you from? What are your intentions? How long until you two get a dog? Lena set the table with the kind of competence that makes you want to applaud. She moved through the room like choreography, and watching her I felt that big swelling thing you feel when you live with a person whose absence used to be a wound and now is just an empty seat. Someone asked how we picked the Wi-Fi name and I said, Light. I wanted Land Solo, but she vetoed me. Everyone groaned appropriately, and then Nora, who has those eyes that find the thread in a sweater, said, Good call. Last time she named it the ex's nickname and it was a whole thing. The pan spat, the room tilted, my brain did that recorder screech like a bus braking. What? I said too calmly. Lena did an entire silent scream face at Nora that communicated an encyclopedia. Nora clapped her hand over her mouth in a pantomime that would have crushed at a high school play. Kidding, she said. Kidding. It was plant-based even then. Everyone laughed, the unsteady laugh of people stepping off a curb they didn't see. Later, when we were brushing our teeth, I said, playfully around toothpaste, so your ex was named after a plant? She spat, wiped, and said, he was named Oliver. We called him Ollie sometimes. It's not a plant unless you count him as extremely leafy. She smiled, the small, careful one she uses when she hopes the conversation can be a paper airplane thrown gently into the night air and not an anchor. Did Nora really? I began. She didn't mean anything, she said. She's like that. She loves open doors. She forgets bugs fly in. We went to bed and slept diagonally. You do not need me to tell you what started happening next. Once you notice a thing, it stops being shy. I'd open my phone in the lobby and there would be come_home_oli like an old friend at a bus stop. I'd take the trash out and there would be sorry_about_the_soup like a sequel to a joke I wasn't in on. A new one arrived, Miss_your_cooking, which I minded not at all because I like competition. There was one that made me feel something like pity, do_you_still_have_my_red_scarf. It was all ridiculous, I knew. Someone was communicating with an Ollie, not my business, and yet my brain, star of the show, kept planning a TED talk about building codes for boundaries. I asked around the building casually. The super shrugged and said, half this place is artists trying to get each other's attention without talking, which, fair. An older woman on the second floor named Pat, whose door was decorated with metal frogs, said, I think it's sweet, and then said, unless it's creepy. Is it creepy? I admitted I didn't know yet. I asked Lena on a Sunday walk, be honest, did you ever do that? Write messages in the air with your Wi-Fi name? She took too long to answer. Once, she said. When Oliver moved out. It felt funny. Like a postcard. He never saw it. He was already with Isla by then. She said the new girlfriend's name as if it tasted like a vitamin. I hate that I know that, I said. She said, me too. If the story had ended there, if the apartment continued to be a collage of other people's confessions, maybe I write a different story. What happened was smaller, meaner, and somehow more intimate. I came home early one Tuesday because a meeting that could have been an email was cancelled for being precisely that. I stopped for a rotisserie chicken because adulthood has discovered no greater hack. I juggled chicken, keys, mail, and a plant mister for Gary because none of us are free from our captors. The door was unlocked. I called, hello. Lena answered from the bedroom, in here, light, guilty, the way you say, just a minute, like you don't want someone to see your hands toward the cookie jar. I set the chicken down and went to kiss her. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with the router in her lap, typing into her laptop. We're getting so many drops, she said too quickly, the kind of technical complaint you deploy like smoke. I'm updating the firmware. Do you need help? I asked, because if there is one thing I know how to do, it is make software or hardware worse by touching it. Nope, she said. Just clicking. It was only later, after we ate half the chicken standing up like raccoons and watched an episode of a show where everyone is beautiful and sad in glass buildings, that I looked at my phone and saw the network list again. com_home_li had been replaced by Oliver_if_u_can_c_this_text_me. The words walked across my brain like ants. I did not bring it up right then. I was out of words that wouldn't topple dominoes in the wrong direction. I put my phone down like it might explode and tried, very maturely, to act like a person in a room with another person and not like a detective suddenly aware of all the ways to be ridiculous. We brushed our teeth quietly. She asked if I could get more coffee beans tomorrow. I said sure. We turned off lamps. Then, in the dark like we were children in bunk beds, I said, "Did you change our network name tonight?" Silence. "No," she said. "Why?" And 24 micro-expressions tripped across my face even though she couldn't see them. "Because I'm looking at a list where someone across the hall renamed theirs to a message for Oliver." "We don't live across the hall," she said, a defense that would have been more effective if it were a defense of anything. "Lena," I said into the dark. "Did you change our Wi-Fi name?" It was not a question by the end. She rolled onto her back. "It was a joke," she said. "A dumb one. I was going to change it back. I wanted to see if he saw it. I forgot how to be generous. It fell off me like a coat in summer. You wrote a message to your ex inside our home." "No," she said, sitting up, swatting the air like she could bat the thought away. "I wrote a message in the air around the home. There's a difference." I turned on the lamp because if a conversation is going to get uglier, it should at least be well lit. "Why?" I asked, doing that calm voice you do when you're trying to keep the top on something boiling. "Would you want him to see anything? What does that accomplish other than turning me into a person who has to ask why?" She pulled her hair into a knot with a sentence, "Because I saw him." We stared at each other like we were across a river. "Where?" "Bodega on 6th, she said. "He was buying seltzer like a person I don't know. He didn't see me." I felt unfinished. I wanted to say hi and also tell him not to. So I wrote it where he might see it, while I could still pretend it wasn't me. She laughed once and it was the saddest little hinge. "It's not flattering, I know." "You didn't tell me," I said. "Because I didn't want to make it real," she said, and I did the cruelest thing I know how to do, which is reach for a clever sentence. "You didn't want to make it real, so you broadcast it." We did not sleep. I lied there feeling my heart working like it had overtime. In the morning, she changed the Wi-Fi name back to Apartment Plant and put the password back to Carb Sandkisses and left a sticky note on Gary that said, "No more secrets." He was unimpressed. I went to work and stared at emails like they were written in a language I used to be fluent in. At lunch, Nora texted, "I heard there was an Olliequake," followed by a ghost emoji, then, "Too soon." I didn't answer. That week I learned just how many tiny ways two people can punish each other without using knives. We did the chore dance where you do the dishes louder than necessary so the other person knows you are noble. We did the schedule tango where you are home at weird hours so your people don't overlap. We did the sentence economy where everything costs twice as much because you're tipping for your tone. Then on Friday, after a day that seemed designed by an enemy, I got home to find the living room lit like a cooking show and, on the table, a laptop open to a document titled, "Why I Did the Dumb Thing and What I Think I'm Actually Saying." She had made bullet points. I sat down because the first one hit me in the chest. "I think I was trying to prove to myself I could wave without wanting to be held," it read. "And then I did the thing that proves the opposite." The second bullet was worse. If I'm honest, I wanted him to see that I have a home. That I'm not a ghost. That I choose someone else now, and it's not because I lost, it's because I finally figured out how to win at something that isn't a competition. The third bullet, I am embarrassed to admit how much of my life I narrate to an imaginary audience. Sometimes I wrote our fights to people who are not in the room. It feels safer than telling the person in the room he can hurt me because he matters. She stepped out of the kitchen with a dish towel and the face of a person who knows you are reading about her and is doing it anyway. I made a list for you to read because when I talk I panic and say the medium smart thing, she said. This is the deeply dumb and deeply true thing. She's Saturday, do you want me to read it out loud or should I just give you the soup? Because she had, in fact, made soup, corrective or poetic, I couldn't tell. I looked at her. Do you miss him? I asked, not softly. No, she said, quickly enough that it felt like a reflex. Then she added, I missed the person I was trying to be around him. The one who wrote speeches in the air. She was always a ghost. I'm trying to stop being a ghost. We ate soup. It was very good. That annoyed me for no reason. We decided, like grown-ups who Googled how to be a grown-up mid-fight, to go to therapy. We found a woman named Dar Singh who had a plant jungle and a mug that said, feel feelings, drink water, in a font that made me feel both calm and personally attacked. On the first day, she listened to our ridiculous story about air messages like we were describing a flood. You kept the door cracked, she said to Lena. So you could feel like no one was trapped inside. Yes, Lena said, not proud, not ashamed, just like someone accepting a package with her name on it. Dr. Singh turned to me. And you, she said, wanted the door locked so you could finally relax. Yes, I said, surprised by how precise and simple it sounded. We wrote a boundary like a treaty. No messages to the void of old relationships. No, just one coffee, meetings, no ghostwriting to audiences who used to clap. If an ex reached out, the other person would know before anyone responded. If one of us saw an ex in the wild and it shook up our brain's snow globe, we would say the sentence that felt impossible and holy. I need you to hold my hand while I put this back down. We put it on the fridge next to a magnet shaped like a pickle that says, I'm kind of a big deal. It was undignified and perfect. We were, predictably, bad at the treaty before we were good at it. 2 weeks later, we went to a birthday party at a bowling alley that smelled like nachos and childhood. Lena's phone buzzed and she looked at it and then at me and then at the Wi-Fi networks, my enemy, my friend, and said, I need to say the thing. She showed me a message from an unknown number that said, weird question, do you have my red scarf? She hadn't answered. I watched the perfect little opportunity for science and control and pettiness walk into the room and I held the door for it as it left. Do you want to block it together? I asked. Yes, she said, and we did, and then we bowled the worst combined game in history with the glee of people who truly did not care. There were setbacks. I went through a phase where I checked the network list like an addict. I'd ride the elevator and take a hit, any messages today? I had to delete the Analyzer app one secretly downloaded to see who renamed their network when. It was a low moment, me, a grown man, in a stairwell, staring at signal strength like it was a tarot card. I admitted it to Dr. Singh and she laughed gently and said, our unhelpful coping mechanisms always think they're the hero of the story. Thank them for their service, then invite them to retire. We made me a new hobby where I look for the ugliest router name and congratulate it aloud. Congratulations, Xfinity_5G_2.5 on your commitment to confusion. Well done, TP_BA2C on sounding like a robot dating profile. A funny thing happened once we stopped writing to ghosts, our space got bigger. We started moving furniture around without bumping our shins on the invisible chairs where exes sat. The apartment felt less like a museum of previous lives and more like a workshop for this one. We fought about chores like amateurs and then solved it by making a chart I named Domestic Diplomacy, and instantly regretted, and we laughed, which does more for a home than any lamp. When the first snow came and shut the city up like a whispered secret, we sat in the dim light and watched a movie about people trying and failing and trying again, and halfway through, for no reason I could point to, I felt that bloom you feel when you pick up a box that used to be heavy and realize it got easier because you grew stronger, not because someone took things out. In the spring, on a walk, we passed the bodega on 6th. She squeezed my hand in a way that said polite elegy and kept walking. We have a sign now we use when an old story tries to come and sit at our table. We tap our chest twice like we're trying to knock dust off of armor and say, "No room." When you do it gently, it looks like affection. When you do it firm, it feels like one. Sometimes the Wi-Fi list still blooms with other people's dramas. Last week there was tell_Brent_T_move_his_CR and Beth_call_your_mom and one classic FBI_surveillance_van. My personal favorite was a small poem, sorry_about_the_soup_again. We laugh. We are not above rereading, out loud, the best ones like fortune cookies. But when I see one that flashes the old name, once_oli_now_olives, or maybe my brain put it there because it loves magic tricks, I feel a little tug and then I let it go. The air can hold other people's short stories. Ours now lives in the things we say and don't broadcast. The grocery list, the calendar notification that says, "Remember to be kind," the note on Gary that says, "Stay alive you diva." A few weeks ago the super asked if I could help him reset the router for apartment 4B because the tenant moved out and left everything weird. I followed him in, and the place had that echo of vacancy you can taste. He unplugged and replugged, and I watched the network names disappear and come back like a conjuring. There it was, come_home_oli. The new tenant would rename it to something else, something that had nothing to do with us. The past is so sure of its permanence right up until someone unplugs the power and plugs it back in and the thing boots with a different face. I stood there and felt a tenderness I don't know how to explain. Toward the idiot brave people who write into the air, toward the idiot brave person I love who did it once and then stopped, toward the idiot brave person I am who will always check one more time just to see if we're okay and then, finding that we are, go make breakfast. The last time I mentioned any of this out loud was to an Uber driver who told me his wife used to send him morning love notes by renaming their printer, and he kept forgetting to check and she'd get mad, and then one day they realized just texting, "Thinking of you," worked better than inventing a treasure hunt neither of them had time for. He was right. The truth may not always be clever, but it is always strong. Last night, after a small fight about whether we need a new rug, we do, this will never be resolved in our lifetime, I went to refill our water glasses and saw a new sticky note on the fridge below the treaty. She'd written, "If you ever wonder whether I'm tempted to be clever instead of honest, I am. But I'd rather be here with you, bored by our sincerity, than entertained by my cleverness alone." It was ridiculous and it made me want to cry into the sink. We sat on the floor, our backs against the cabinets, and read each other the worst metaphors we could invent for how much we were going to try again tomorrow. She said, "I'll rename the whole sky if you need me to," which is terrible writing and perfect love, and I said, "I only need the network to be apartment plant," and she said, "And the password?" and I said, "Carb Sankisses," and she said, "Good," and we lived another day in a house with no secret messages, where the things you need to know are written where you can see them, where if you want to say "come home," you stand in the doorway and say it. And the person comes, not because you hid it in the air, but because you are theirs and they are yours, and that is a plain thing that doesn't need clever, only care.